Welcome back to another episode of WarFront Pulse. After more than 4 years of war, Russia's offensive in Ukraine is facing an increasingly difficult combination to sustain. Slow territorial gains, heavy personnel losses, Ukrainian strikes reaching deeper into Russian territory, and growing pressure on the energy infrastructure that helps finance Moscow's war effort. Figures presented by Ukrainian, Russian, and Western sources show that although Russia continues to advance in some sectors of the front, it is paying a very high price for relatively small territorial gains. And the relationship between territory captured and resources consumed may be one of the keys to understanding the current phase of the war. In November 2022, following Ukraine's counteroffensives in the Kharkiv and Kherson regions, Russian forces controlled approximately 108,600 square kilometers of Ukrainian territory, or roughly 41,900 square miles, about 18% of the country. By mid-2026, that figure had risen to around 116,000 square kilometers, or approximately 44,800 square miles, about 20% of Ukraine. That means that over roughly 3.5 years of offensive operations, Moscow expanded its occupation by less than 2 percentage points of Ukrainian territory. The current pace is also dramatically different from what was seen during the opening weeks of the invasion, when Russian forces occupied more than 60,000 square kilometers, roughly 23,000 square miles, in a relatively short period before withdrawing from several regions. Today, in heavily fortified sectors of Donetsk, advances are measured in just dozens of yards per day. That does not mean Russia has lost its offensive capability. It means that every additional mile of territory gained now requires far more time, troops, ammunition, and equipment than it did at the beginning of the war. Consider following our channel to stay up to date on military developments in the United States and around the world. The human cost of this strategy is one of the most difficult factors to measure, because Russia and Ukraine report different figures, and no wartime estimate should be treated as a definitive count. According to the Ukrainian General Staff, Russian casualties, including those killed and wounded, exceeded 1.45 million by the end of July 2026. Estimates from Western intelligence services and institutions cited in the analysis are lower, but still point to an extremely high toll. Approximately 400,000 to 500,000 Russian service members killed, with total losses, including those killed, wounded, and missing, estimated at between 1.1 and 1.4 million. Another important indicator is Russia's ability to replace those personnel. According to the figures presented, Russia is recruiting approximately 27,000 new soldiers per month, while its monthly losses in 2026 are estimated at around 34,000. If that gap continues for an extended period, Moscow will have to increase recruitment, reduce its losses, or turn to new forms of mobilization to sustain the same pace of operations. But there is another factor that helps explain why the battlefield has changed so dramatically: drones. Ukraine rapidly transformed what was once a small, unmanned systems industry into a large-scale production network. In July 2026, President Volodymyr Zelensky said the country had reached the capacity to produce 10 million drones per year and intended to increase that figure to 20 million with support from European partners. Independent estimates cited in the analysis are more conservative, placing actual production at between 5 and 6 million units annually. Even under that lower estimate, the transformation is significant. Ukraine went from approximately 10 domestic manufacturers in 2022 to more than 400 and 450 by 2026. These systems perform very different missions. FPV drones attack vehicles, positions, and small groups of soldiers near the front line. Interceptor drones are being developed to destroy Russian drones, and longer-range systems are taking the campaign hundreds or even thousands of miles beyond Ukrainian positions. It is precisely this last category that has begun producing consequences far beyond the battlefield. Ukraine has expanded its strikes against logistics hubs, military installations, and especially Russia's oil infrastructure. According to the analysis, by mid-2026, Ukrainian strikes had already reached Russia's 10 largest refineries at different points during the campaign. The International Energy Agency estimated that approximately 500 barrels per day of oil processing capacity had been taken offline, out of an estimated total capacity of 6.6 million barrels per day. The strategic objective is important. Russia can continue extracting crude oil, but it needs refineries to convert part of that crude into diesel, gasoline, and jet fuel. When critical units inside those facilities are damaged, Moscow has to repair complex industrial equipment while simultaneously maintaining domestic fuel supplies and financing a large-scale war. It is a way of putting pressure on military logistics and economic capacity at the same time. That pressure is particularly significant because oil and natural gas remain critical sources of revenue for Russia. According to projections cited in the material, Russia's own Ministry of Economic Development revised its expectations for energy production and exports downward. Deputy Prime Minister Alexander Novak projected Russia's Urals crude at approximately $59 per barrel in 2026, with estimates near $50 per barrel between 2027 and 2029. There's also a commercial dimension. After much of the European market dramatically reduced its purchases, China and India became even more important destinations for Russian exports. Those buyers know that Moscow has fewer alternatives. The greater Russia's need to sell and the fewer buyers available, the more negotiating power those countries may have over prices and terms. That is why the energy struggle cannot be separated from the war itself. Lower revenue means less financial room to simultaneously fund military production, salaries, benefits for soldiers, reconstruction of damaged facilities, and the broader domestic economy. Crimea represents a particularly important example of this strategy of logistical pressure. The peninsula annexed by Russia in 2014 depends on land and maritime routes to receive fuel, food, ammunition, and other supplies. According to the data presented in the analysis, traffic along the R-280 highway, one of the main land connections between Crimea and Russian territory, reportedly fell by 71% in just 2 weeks during the period examined. Reports also indicated fuel supply problems and rationing measures in certain areas. For Ukraine, putting pressure on these routes has a clear military logic. The more difficult and expensive it becomes to supply the peninsula, the greater the effort required to keep Russian bases, air defense systems, and military units operating in the region. Ukraine does not have to completely shut down the logistics network. Simply reducing its efficiency already forces Russia to spend more resources to achieve the same result. All of this pressure also connects to a politically sensitive issue for the Kremlin, the need for more soldiers. Since the partial mobilization of September 2022, Moscow has prioritized financial incentives and signing bonuses to attract volunteers while avoiding another large-scale nationwide call-up. The reason is straightforward. Another mobilization would bring the human cost of the war directly into more families that until now have remained relatively insulated from the conflict. The source material cites estimates suggesting a potential future requirement for an additional 300,000 to 500,000 military personnel, but it does not provide official confirmation that a mobilization on that scale has been decided. That is why the balance between recruitment and losses will be one of the most important indicators to watch over the coming months. If Moscow continues losing more personnel than it can replace through voluntary recruitment, the government will have to find another way to close that gap. Despite all of these difficulties, there is one fundamental point that needs to be understood. The numbers do not show that Russia is on the verge of an immediate collapse. Moscow still controls approximately 1/5 of Ukrainian territory, maintains a large defense industry, continues conducting long-range strikes, and possesses considerable human and economic resources. Ukraine also faces serious challenges. Kyiv must replace its own losses, finance a prolonged war, and maintain stocks of air defense systems, particularly Patriot interceptors used against threats that other systems cannot always effectively counter. So the question is not simply which side advanced a few miles during any given month. The real indicator will be which country can sustain the combination of personnel, ammunition, drones, air defense, logistics, and financial resources required to continue fighting for longer. After more than 4 years, the war has entered a phase in which small changes on the map can conceal enormous developments behind the scenes. Russia continues advancing in certain sectors, but those gains are accompanied by heavy losses and rising costs. Ukraine, meanwhile, is trying to compensate for its disadvantage in population and resources through drones, long-range strikes, and pressure against Russia's economic and logistical infrastructure. Over the coming months, 3 indicators will be especially important to watch. First, the pace of Russia's territorial advances. Second, the relationship between battlefield losses and new recruitment. And third, Ukraine's ability to continue striking refineries, logistics hubs, and other strategic facilities inside Russia. None of these factors alone will decide the war, but together, they will show whether Moscow can transform its enormous military investment into lasting strategic gains, or whether it will continue paying increasingly higher costs for limited territorial advances. And that is a fundamental difference between simply continuing an offensive and being able to sustain it over the long term. Subscribe and follow our next videos to understand what's happening in the military landscape of the United States and around the world.